Welcome everybody to Envisioning the New Normal. This is a series of interviews with thought leaders and influencers about their vision for a more sustainable way of living and working as we emerge from COVID-19. I'm Wynne-lewis, a leadership development facilitator, trainer, coach based in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. And I'm doing this because I believe that we have a unique opportunity right now in the middle of this crisis to think critically about the sort of future we want to create and to fast track our progress towards that. This is the fourth interview in the series, and I'm very proud to have with us today Dr. Rodger Spiller, who is an expert in ethical and sustainable investment. He does that through his business Money Matters, and he's also actively committed to developing more ethical and sustainable business development through his other business, Rodger Spiller and Associates. So Rodger is very well respected in the investment community and described by many as New Zealand's foremost expert on responsible investing and business, and he's been in that field for many years, since the 1980s, I believe. So welcome, Rodger. Lovely to have you with us.
Thanks, Robin. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
So as with the other interviewees, I'm asking just two questions, but they are quite large questions. And the first is, what's your vision for the new normal? And I mean globally, nationally, and specifically in your area of influence. And then secondly, how do you think we get there? What are the steps? And in particular, because of your background, I'm really interested in both the type of investment you think that we need to be engaging in and also the leadership required. So over to you.
So my vision is of a world in which everyone can enjoy wealth and well-being on a sustainable planet. And achieving that is going to require a massive amount of investment in money. So my first passion is enabling people to have their money really matter and make a difference in achieving that vision through ethical investment advice. Yeah. But what we also need to do is transform business through leadership that really appreciates and understands these challenges and has that capability to take people with them. And that's my other passion, leadership development. So I look at the world of business through the lens of the ethical investor and say, what kind of leadership do we need and how can we develop that? But today I'm wearing my authorized financial advisor hat, and as part of that, I need to stress that there's a disclosure statement that you can get from me free of charge on request, and we'll have a little slide at the end of the session which has got my contact details. Also need to highlight this is a class service, so no customized, individualized advice. Don't go and take any of these comments and implement your portfolio and say, Spiller advised you so. And last but by no means least, it comes with all the usual disclaimers, and we'll have a couple of those at the end for you as well.
Okay, excellent. So very important to cover off the red tape. Thank you, Rodger. So your vision, is big, global wealth and well-being at the same time. Could you say a bit more about how that fits in with other stated global intentions at the moment?
One of the opportunities that this whole COVID crisis has highlighted is our interconnected nature, that we're all in this together. And for the business community and sustainable responsible investment community, a lot of the guidance we get is from the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development, just titled Transforming Our World. It was set up in 2015. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and within all that there's also 169 specific targets. So business and investment is being directed towards achieving those. And the UN highlight that money really does matter and leadership really does matter. So these two passions that I've got are playing important roles when we can get investors and business leaders to really engage. And the opportunities are just massive. So on the one hand, we've got crises and real threats, but also huge opportunities. And if we take one of those, the Sustainable Development Goal for gender equity, equality, if that was achieved in the next 5 years, we would add $28 trillion every year to global GDP. That's 26% of GDP. So the opportunity is there. Investors and leaders can step up, and we can all play our part in terms of how we invest our money.
Okay, so so you're saying that there's a huge opportunity to shift our investment into areas of social and environmental responsibility in alignment with these United Nations SDGs. But if we were to do that, well, how does that different from a traditional business as usual investment portfolio?
Well, the traditional approach tends to be quite short-term, quite narrow, and really lacking in depth. So I call it shallow. And the traditional investor just thinks about risk and return, oftentimes is just thinking from a shareholder perspective. But if they can widen that perspective to take account of all the stakeholders, to think about the environment, to think about society at large, the community, think about consumers, think about suppliers, really think about employees and how everyone can work together. That's actually enlightened self-interest. It's in the best interest of the shareholders. And many leading executives globally are now talking about this stakeholder perspective. Of course, we want to see whether they walk the talk, but certainly there's a lot of signals that there's a changing focus there. And then there's been a very short-term myopic perspective. Next quarter's bottom line, we've got to satisfy the shareholders, and these shareholders are just short-term. Well, not necessarily. There's a large and growing number of ethical and sustainable investors that are taking a longer-term perspective. And when you get that longer-term perspective, you get smarter investments that are actually going to provide more wealth over the longer term. And we can even think about this in intergenerational terms, taking that kind of perspective. And then addressing the shallow dimension, what we need is leaders who can really transform themselves and their organizations by going down to the deep end of the pool and really getting into the leadership development that makes a real difference, so we can transform our world and achieve that vision that the UN has set out.
Okay, so you're suggesting that this responsible, ethical, sustainable investment can be just as lucrative, just as rewarding as the existing kind of investments that people are in. Is that right?
Absolutely. There's plenty of academic research that shows that you can do well while doing good, and quite a lot that says you do well by doing good. And in fact, what we're doing is changing the matrix. So at the moment, people are just thinking about risk and return. And when they think about that in a short-term and narrow sense, oftentimes they're missing out on lots of opportunities to actually reduce their risk by thinking, for example, about environmental impacts and challenges, and to increase their returns by investing in industries of the future. But this third dimension, which is coming in, is saying, okay, I've got my risk, I've got my return. What about my real world impact? What's the impact I'm having, for better or worse, with my investments? And when we introduce that dimension, it's possible to get a real transformation occurring. And so what we want to see is a change in mindsets and a change in action. So more people are investing and more businesses are engaging in this way.
Okay, so changing that mindset is how do you go about what is the shift, the essential shift that is required, do you think, to get people? Because it sounds like a no-brainer, right? If I just move over here, I can tick the same boxes as before and be doing good for the wider world. Why isn't everyone doing it?
Well, haven't all listened to our podcast. So we need education first and foremost. So people need to be aware of the importance of changing. And there's a lot of big assumptions that people can have about this. They can think, oh, goodness me, the word ethical or responsible, that must necessarily mean I'm giving up returns or I'm taking more risk. So when you probe more deeply and do more research, you'll find that oftentimes that's not the case. Now, it's important to, that comes with a bit of a caveat. So it does require good research and smart thinking, and there are all sorts of facets to be considered. But I think one of the really interesting things is that it is possible that someone might know that they need to change or they want to change, but they don't. Now, we see it with diets all the time. But I think another interesting example is given by Harvard's Keegan and Leahy, adult education and developmental psychologists that we'll refer to a little bit later in our discussion. But just for now, they talk about the number of patients that go to the doctor and for their heart condition, they're prescribed exercise and diet and medications. Yet only 1 in 7 actually does what the doctor says. So I'm the ethical money doctor. I'm encouraging you to do this. The question is how many people will? And we know that most won't, unfortunately. So we need to keep on, and for those people that are listening and are wanting to spread the word, then having more people know about this can be one of the really key steps. But we need to get over that difference between knowing about it and acting on it.
Okay, so Rodger, I'd love to explore more about the UN Vision, the Sustainable Development Goals, and how our government is supporting that. I know that we have our own wellbeing framework now. Could you perhaps just touch on that briefly? But in the interest of time, I think it would be also good to move on to where can individuals go to start this investment journey?
Well, from a New Zealand perspective, I think it's good to know that we've fully signed up for the Sustainable Development Goals and that agenda. Every year we're producing a report that is talking about our progress. The focus of our report is kaitiakitanga or guardianship and looking beyond GDP. So we've got a whole living standards framework, which people have heard about in terms of wellbeing indicators, taking a perspective across environmental, social and economic approaches, looking for inclusivity, looking at productivity, and really looking to ensure that we do our part in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and indeed the Paris Accord on climate change. In the finance community, we've got the Sustainable Finance Forum that I'm part of, with leaders looking to, again, really take big steps. So talking about the next 10 years as being the decisive decade towards that 2030 framework. So there's a lot for us to do at a governmental level, at an industry level, and at an individual level. At an individual level, it really comes down to saying, well, what can I do? How can I make a difference? How can I get involved in tackling these environmental and social challenges? And one of those is to think about my money, how that matters, thinking about how my portfolio is currently impacting. So we can almost look at an indicator, if you like, of the amount of harm on the one hand that my investments are doing and the amount of good on the other, or impact it's having, real world sustainable impact. So risk, return and real world impact, that third factor can be built into the equation. And for investors who do that, they can move out of those areas that are part of the problem and be increasingly part of the solution.
Okay, so that's great, and I'm sure there's a lot more detail that you could supply to interested people around that, Rodger. But just briefly, what sort of investments offer the strongest ethics and responsibility?
In my experience, it's the funds that are specifically promoting themselves as ethical and sustainable leaders that are the ones that are going to have made the most efforts in terms of really defining exactly what they're excluding from investment, focusing on what they're including, and then talking about how they're engaging with companies to encourage them to continuously improve and achieve better results in terms of the environmental, social and governance performance, and have bigger impacts in terms of those sustainable development goals. But all of this comes with a bit of a warning, and the regulator, the Financial Markets Authority, has highlighted in recent times that there's a lot of greenwashing out there. So a lot of funds can say, well, we're doing all these wonderful things, and many of the fund managers had a road to Damascus conversion experience a few years ago when there was a lot of media focused on KiwiSaver and how so much of that money was invested in things that were actually illegal, and
Yes.
things like armaments and ammunitions and things that many people thought ought not to be part of their portfolios were. So many funds are now saying that they're ethical, but it's really requiring another sort of deeper look from the investor and the advisor to see whether they are really living up to those claims and who are the better providers.
Okay, so it sounds as if it's a little bit of a minefield, and that people would be advised to get some specialist advice around that. Would you agree?
Well, certainly I think there's a lot of value that can be added by working with an ethical investment advisor. There are specialist advisors in this field. There's an industry organisation, the Responsible Investment Association Australasia, that certifies advisors who focus in this field. Obviously, in my case, I've been working away for 30 years and see myself as, if you like, an ethical money doctor. So I can sit down and do the standard advisory processes of really understanding the client, diagnosing their situation and prescribing an optimal plan and portfolio. But that can take account of the ethical criteria that an individual client has, and then looking to the world and saying, well, what are the best solutions, ethical funds and ethical companies that could be helping us to get that real world impact, and then implementing and managing and monitoring that on an ongoing basis.
Okay, excellent. So people could get in touch with you if they wanted to for a steer, for some websites or a steer in the right direction.
By all means, yes. There's plenty of information I can share. No cost, no obligation. I've written chapters and several books and presentations and what have you. So just going on to my website, and the contact details we'll give later, you're more than welcome to make contact. And you can also, of course, talk to your own advisor and say, well, what about this? And look to ensure that they're providing you with what's possible. If they're not, then feel free to come for a second opinion. And then there's industry groups like the Responsible Investment Association, great website to look at to learn more, and other organisations like Mindful Money can tell you what's in your KiwiSaver in terms of things you might want to exclude, or 350.org are doing some great work and have encouraged the government to have exclusions around fossil fuel in KiwiSaver, which is happening from next year. So big changes happening and lots of information out there to learn about it.
Yeah, and really good, voluntary agencies offering assistance to people. I went on the Mindful Money website myself and was fascinated. So anyway, Rodger, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about your other passion. We've probably got another 5 minutes or so before we lose people. Average Kiwi attention span of 20 minutes. So this is I'm really fascinated about your hand-in-hand interest in ethical investment and in leadership development. And from my previous discussions with you, I know that you are interested in really deep leadership development. So for the sake of the listeners though, what is the connection in your mind between responsible investment and leadership development? Can you tell us about that?
My clients, the responsible investors, really want to know that the companies that they're investing in are continuously improving, that they're really going through that transformation that we want to see. And they know that's not going to happen unless from the top down, you've got leadership that is really engaged in seeing these changes occur. But there's a recognition that to make that change is a big change in mindset. In fact, the Sustainable Finance Forum have identified that as the very first thing that needs to occur. So how does that occur? And I found that fascinating over the years, not only thinking about how do investors move to become more ethical and make that journey and implement those values that they probably all hold personally, but also how do businesses make that change. I studied with Harvard's Keegan Leahy, and what they talk about is how so much of what gets presented as leadership development courses that people might go on, or consultants that might come into organizations and saying, we're going to transform you, we're going to develop you. But really it's just about skills. And while skills are all well and good, what we need to do is change that mindset. So adding skills is like changing programs or adding programs to the existing framework. And what they're arguing is, Keegan Leahy is saying, is we need to change the whole operating system. We need to get that complete transformation. That requires a very unique approach, which they've developed, and I've done quite a lot of study and work with them personally. And it's possible to transform the individual mindset and get that change that we need.
Okay, that's again another exciting topic, and something that I'm passionate about as well, and that we're agreed that the real leadership development happens from the inside out and not from the outside in, and it's a different ball game. So really look forward to our continued discussions on that subject. Rodger, is there anything that you would like to add before we wind this up? Any special, are there one or two things that you would be really hopeful that people would take on board and do?
Yeah, I mean, just to sum up, I want to highlight, I sort of feel quite passionate about this, that there are big challenges we're facing in the world. And oftentimes we might not see that down here in our little bubbles, and some of us are in relatively easy bubbles, others are doing it really tough. But if we look at the global context, one of the key things that I think we know about is environmental challenges. And if we look at air pollution alone, that's killing 7 million people a year. That's more than AIDS, malaria, and TB put together. If we look at the Paris Accord on climate change, the target for 1.5 degrees, we're just not going to get there at the current rate. But then if we think about the social issues, there's 40 million people globally who are part of modern slavery. There are 150 million children globally that are working in sweatshops, that are working down mines, that are working in forced labor conditions. And a lot of the products that we're consuming are produced by those children. It's really challenging, I think, for 21st century capitalism that consumers, boardrooms, and investors really wake up to the problems that exist and how we're all either part of the problem or solution. So with that passionate plea, I encourage people to say, okay, there's problems, but we can make a difference. I can make a difference with my money. I can do that by investing more ethically and responsibly, increasing the level of that. And as a leader of an organization, I can really commit to this transformational journey, to changing mindsets, to winning over the hearts of people and getting the action that's required for us to fulfill our potential for New Zealand business and global business, and to channel the business and the investment part of that vision that UN have for transforming our world and that I've got around wealth and well-being for everybody on a sustainable planet.
Well, that's really inspirational, Rodger. I'm excited and really hope that we get to work together on this journey. And thank you for laying out your vision. I think it's so important to have a vision, because if we don't know where we're heading, then we're just going to kind of be swept up into whatever new normal evolves rather than whatever new normal we consciously create. And you've definitely laid out for us how shifting our investments into more responsible things can not only make money but can do good for the planet as well. And I think now is absolutely the time for leaders to be thinking about leadership development, with the huge challenges that they've got for rebuilding their companies, getting back on a solid footing, and doing that in a responsible way. So thank you very much for your contribution. We do just need to leave your slide up on the screen for a few minutes, don't we, for people to read. But thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Robin. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat today, and looking forward to working with you more on the leadership development and combining forces. And everyone at home, I just invite you to take a quick look at this slide. It's got contact details, it's got the disclosure, the class service statement, and the disclaimers. So bye for now.
Bye-bye. And there it is.
www.moneymatters.co.nz for the ethical investment information, and send me an email, roger@moneymatters.co.nz, if you'd like some more of those chapters and backgrounds. And on the leadership development side, www.rodgerspiller.com. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.